name is Harris. I'm the director of our office in New York, and I am the director also of the EMG Secretariat. As such, I'm your host for today's Nexus Dialogue, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to it. This dialogue today is the third in a series of 4 dialogues that have been planned for this year. And the purpose of these dialogues is that we're trying to address the nexus between the implementation of the environmental dimension of the Sustainable Development Agenda and other aspects central to that agenda. The idea is that we will facilitate a discussion and an exchange of information around these nexus issues, coming at them from different perspectives, different themes, with a view to better understanding how they play together and building on that to achieve a better and more effective implementation of the Sustainable Development Agenda overall. The thematic areas of the Sustainable Development Agenda are all interconnected, and that requires a more integrated set of policy making and fuller considerations of the various synergies and trade-offs across and between the various areas of the Sustainable Development Agenda. As we take these interlinkages into consideration and build upon them in our implementation efforts, we will be making better progress towards the full achievement of that agenda. The purpose of these Nexus dialogues is to provide an opportunity for the UN, for its various agencies, funds and programs, as well as for other stakeholders to come together to explore how we can strengthen the implementation of the SDGs by looking at the interlinkages between the various goals and their targets, and the lessons that we've learned in implementation across the various agendas, and what good practice has been. We hope ultimately that the dialogues will support the agencies and the stakeholders in identifying areas of mutual interest by understanding better what are the transmission channels between action in one area and outcomes in another. If we take it one step further, we think that the dialogues can also strengthen the partnerships across the stakeholder groups and or trigger the establishment of new ones where necessary. And that then will contribute to a more integrated formulation of policy and a more coherent implementation of policy going forward. The first of these Nexus dialogues took place in Geneva in April. It introduced the Nexus methodology as a means of supporting the implementation of the environmental dimension of the Sustainable Development Agenda in a more coherent and collaborative manner. The dialogue also presented a mapping out of key Nexus areas for the focus of the future dialogues, and those included the nexus between poverty and the environment, which was the subject of the second dialogue, which we held in New York in July on the margins of the high-level political forum. And it also included the humanitarian and environment nexus, which is the subject of today's dialogue. The fourth of the themes is the nexus between urban pollution and health and the environment. That dialogue will be held on the margins of the UN Environment Assembly, which will be held in Nairobi at the beginning of December. Now, during the first dialogue, the colleagues acknowledged that the humanitarian activities very often imply responding to urgencies in the short term, whereas on the other hand, addressing environmental concerns tends to be a longer-term affair. The strong focus on relief and recovery in humanitarian activities and the very urgency of the humanitarian response leaves less room for addressing the root causes of the crisis, and these root causes very often have an environmental component. Environmental change can be both the cause and the consequence of humanitarian crises and instability. Environmental disasters and degradation have contributed to the overwhelming number of internally displaced persons, migrants and refugees that we're trying to deal with today. Ecosystem services that are crucial for our survival are being weakened as a result of climate change and of pollution. And humanitarian aid has increasingly been needed in response to natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and we've seen great evidence of that in the last couple of months. And we find as well that large numbers of people being displaced are placing additional burdens on the scarce natural resources in the areas that receive them. And this poses a threat to the security of food and water supplies, as well as can serve as a driver of conflicts in the environment. But at the same time, the humanitarian action itself can have environmental consequences. impacts that are adverse. In some cases, the response measures have resulted in deforestation and biodiversity loss, where in particular, where the environment impact assessments have not been undertaken and integrated into the response planning for humanitarian assistance. It's also imperative to address the environmental impact to a host region or a host country of the large numbers of refugees or displaced persons that are being housed in so-called temporary camps, for example, often for very extended periods. For example, the massive use of plastic bottles and the challenge of dealing with wastewater in the camps, food and supplies packaging. All of these have environmental impacts which you can't solve effectively after the fact. Assessing these impacts is critical if we want to avert or at least mitigate the environmental impact of some of these humanitarian activities. The Nexus approach will help us to make connections across the sectors and the domains and enable stronger partnerships, as I mentioned before. We already have several very well-functioning partnerships in this particular area that address the integration of the environment into humanitarian action. And we'll hear more of some of these partnerships today. They include the coordination of assessments for the environment and humanitarian action, which is a joint initiative between UN Environment, the UN Environment and OCHA Joint Environment Unit, OCHA itself, the UNHCR, and USAID. However, while many efforts are already underway to mainstream environmental considerations into humanitarian action, many times these efforts are somewhat tightly focused on project-based activity. They are limited in time, they're limited in scope. Effectively mainstreaming and integrating the environmental considerations into the humanitarian sector's goals not only contributes to managing the environmental impacts of the humanitarian response, but it can also increase resilience. And even more importantly, it can make the recovery itself more sustainable. This dialogue will zoom in among the various aspects of this nexus. It will zoom in particular on strengthening partnerships between the environmental and humanitarian sectors with a view to developing low-impact humanitarian assistance systems that support climate and disaster-resilient recovery and that contribute to disaster and climate-resilient development. The technical segment this morning will build on an analysis of linkages among the two sectors in the context of the SDGs and the humanitarian change agenda, as well as on examples of existing partnerships and good practices, including those that have been reported via our e-discussion series. We'll then also have an opportunity to discuss longer-term and systematic integration of environmental sustainability into humanitarian action through joint policies and programs. And then in the afternoon, our high-level panel will share views on addressing the environment in humanitarian operations. Now, this dialogue will have an additional purpose. At the last meeting of the senior officials of the Environment Management Group in New York in September, the senior officials requested the EMG Secretariat, in consultation with interested members of the EMG, to prepare terms of reference for a possible issue management on the integration of the environment into humanitarian action. So it is our hope that this dialogue today will give us very valuable input into the formulation of these terms of reference for the EMG's work on the environment-humanitarian nexus. It will help us to identify and to clarify what such an interagency effort should focus on and ultimately result in. It could take the shape, for example, of preparing a set of principles or a framework for greening the environmental footprint of humanitarian interventions, in much the same way that the REACT program is doing for the Department of Field Services, the UN's peacekeeping and political missions. And we'll hear more about that from Andrew a little bit later on this morning. So let me stop or conclude by thanking the colleagues in UN Environment, the UN Environment OCHA Joint Environment Unit, the UNHCR, the Stockholm Environment Institute, and the Institute for International Communication for all their support. I also like in particular to thank the Government of Switzerland for sponsoring these Nexus dialogues. I'm really looking forward to our discussions today, and once again, let me warmly welcome you all to this event, and wish us all a fruitful morning and afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, Elliot. Welcome from my side as well. My name is Ollie Brown. I'm based at UN Environment's headquarters in Nairobi, where I coordinate our work around the environmental causes and consequences of disasters and conflicts. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Elliot was saying, this is a really important process to try and think about addressing one of the major footprints of the international community in terms of the impact of humanitarian operations. And this day plays a really important role in terms of gathering information, gathering ideas about what we can do to address that. So, as Elliot was saying, the approach that we have is to start off with a few different discussions, presentations, to set the scene, to lay out some of the challenges, to talk a little bit about what's been learned already. And what I'd like to do is to start off with Amelia Wallstrom, who heads up our Joint Environment Unit between UN Environment and the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. We'll talk a little bit about the sort of setting the scene of integrating environment into humanitarian action. We'll give a presentation of around 15 minutes. We'll open up for some questions, if there's questions of clarification. Then we'll go to a series of other presentations, and then we'll have some time to really kind of delve in. We want it to be really informal. It's about the ideas. It's about getting the sort of collective experience, the collective wisdom of the people in the room here to help us chart our way forward. So thank you again for coming. Really good to have you here. I really look forward to some great discussions. Amelia, over to you.
Thank you. So I should use the mic for the web, right?
Yeah, we have one still, yeah. Okay, so that should be on, yeah.
Thanks. Is it on? Yes? Thank you. So, hello everyone, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. I know there's quite a few familiar faces here in the audience, so maybe for some of you this is already a familiar topic, but for those, this presentation is maybe primarily for those who don't know the background of environment in humanitarian action. So, indeed, my name is Amelia Wallstrom, and I work in the Joint Environment Unit. So in that respect, I guess I'm well placed to talk about the links between humanitarian action and environment, because the Joint Environment Unit was in fact set up 23 years ago as a partnership between UN Environment and OCHA at the request of member states. And member states specifically requested that we don't create a new structure or a new UN mechanism, but that we rather integrate the existing environmental expertise of UN Environment into the humanitarian coordination structures. So this is a partnership alive and kicking. 23 years later, we are still operational and working on this very specific topic. So what do we mean by integrating environment in humanitarian action? I think Elliot already talked about the links. What we do see and what has been universally recognized is that humanitarian and environmental goals do go hand in hand. And we're talking here primarily about two different types of impact. So of course we see that environment is linked to the vulnerability of populations to disaster risks. So for example, increased land degradation, increased effects of climate change, competition for natural resources. This can all lead to increased vulnerability not only to natural disasters, but it also plays a role in conflict. So that's kind of the one whole big broad topic. But the other thing which we are here to talk about today is that humanitarian action in itself can also cause environmental impacts. And here, of course, especially where we see protracted crisis and humanitarian operations ongoing in countries for 20 years or 30 years, this is, at this point, you do have to think about the environmental consequences of the humanitarian programs. So what, for example, are you doing about water management? How do you deal with the natural resources surrounding the camps and settlements and so on? So this is really the topic that we're here to talk about today. And like it was pointed out, we have quite a few examples of when humanitarian operations, even though they have started, of course, we are all there to do well. We have the moral imperative of not doing harm, but at the same time, in our eagerness to come in to provide assistance possible. We maybe not always think about the long-term consequences of our programs. And maybe just one comment here as well. The understanding of the word environment. This is something that we always run into with humanitarian colleagues. Like, what exactly do you mean? Like, no, I don't care about biodiversity. I don't care about elephants and trees and whatever. I'm here to deal just only with water, or I'm here to deal with energy. And then we're like, yeah, but water is also part of the environment, right? And for energy, you are collecting natural resources. So this is here, when we talk about the environment, we do understand kind of the whole broad setting and where we operate. So that's the chemical, the biological, the physical setting of where we are. So this is very much, of course, the natural environment provides the resources and the livelihoods that people depend on. And unless we have a good environment, and unless the environment is protected, then we of course see the consequences directly impacting the health and the livelihoods of the population. So that's just a comment. And there's also an ongoing discussion whether we should substitute the word environment for something else and rather talk about livelihoods or natural resources. But at the same time, environment is a good word because it's one word and it's very broad and encompassing. So just kind of a disclaimer in the beginning. So what are some of the typical things we've seen? Deforestation is of course one. This can come, for example, from brick production, whether it is which is being done for the construction of shelters. But this can also be just for the provision of energy. A lot of the times, and this is one of the first things that we saw when we first started looking at the environment and humanitarian crisis, is that people come and provide food, but they don't necessarily provide the means to cook the food. So then, of course, what do? Well, you go out and you find, whatever wood and natural resources that you need to prepare the food. So deforestation is one of the key impacts. Groundwater depletion is another one, where humanitarian actors, they don't necessarily go and do detailed groundwater assessments of the water tables, and they don't necessarily see what is already there, what has already been done in terms of hydrological resources, what's available, how much can we use. They don't necessarily coordinate. So groundwater depletion is also a key impact that we have seen. Ruined livelihoods. So this again can cause tensions between displaced populations and host communities, for example. If some of them depend on forests for their livelihoods and the other ones are cutting down the forest, sometimes we think we come in and we develop a really nice program in supporting livelihoods. So for example, in Sri Lanka, post-tsunami, a lot of fishing boats and fishing gear were provided, but it was too much. And then essentially that led also to the depletion of fishing stocks. So it goes to show that you really have to think long term, and you have to take into account not only your own project or programs activities, but also broader. Environmental contamination is of course also a key one, where the most famous sad example is the cholera outbreak in Haiti caused by limited or not adequate water treatment standards. Some additional examples. So from Tanzania as well, this is maybe one of the more famous cases in connection with the refugee crisis. 570 square kilometers of forest was affected, again because of need for fuel by the refugee populations, and a rehabilitation project subsequently had to be implemented to address this. So again, you can start thinking a little bit in money and resources and impacts. Maybe it would have been better to address this from this side. Maldives, also post-tsunami, putting debris in places where it was not supposed to be put, so on the waterfront and on the beaches, which threatened the sea but also groundwater. Also wastewater management in Darfur. So for example, wasting of water in some situations, like not having efficient taps leading to pools of water, which become again the vector ground for a breeding ground for vectors and of disease. And generally, it's also an irresponsible use of water, especially in a context where you don't have so much of it. What has been done so far? Essentially, this whole discussion on environment and humanitarian action started about in the 90s, in the early 90s, and part of it was also linked to the whole discussion on disaster risk reduction, where humanitarian actors were seeing that okay, there are some things which are kind of underlying risks which contribute to vulnerabilities, and environment is one of them. And that's also when we saw some of the big impacts from the Rwanda crisis that I was talking about in Tanzania. So that's where kind of some of the work on standards, for example, the sphere standards, which are used in humanitarian operations, started from that. Recognizing that okay, there are some minimal things that we have to take care of, and we have to do. So environment is now included in the core humanitarian standards as well. It is included in the sphere standards. The sphere standards are being updated now, and it's even more included now in the new version. At the same time, it hasn't really operationalized itself in the activities of the various humanitarian agencies. So there's kind of this recognition now that yes, okay, this is important, but it's still leading to individual initiatives here and there, and some that I can mention, and we'll hear more about them soon. But some, for example, training courses. So WWF has developed a training course on environmental and humanitarian action. Then we also see quite a lot of work now being done on energy and fuel. So we have the SAFE initiative, the Safe Access to Fuel and Energy. We have the Moving Energy initiative. So there's quite a lot of good things being done, but it's still, like what was said earlier, it's individual projects here and there, individual agencies. So it's not kind of across the board. Another thing, there's been studies done, and I'll talk about them soon. So one of them we have also outside. So this one we did with the joint unit in 2014 with the support of Finland, and then as a follow-up, we did 3 country studies, which really looked into how has environment been addressed in humanitarian operations in 3 specific countries. And then you also have the background document, which links some of these study recommendations to the ongoing policy discussions. There's those studies. There's also studies by DFID and some other donors. We also set up an environment and humanitarian action network in 2013, so that has 55 members from various organizations. It's a technical network, exchange of information. We're very looking to see how we can better work together and collaborate on some of these issues. So there's some movement, but there's no, strong coherent push, let's say. So that's why we also welcome very much, as practitioners working already for years on this topic, we very much welcome this initiative of the Environment Management Group, because this we see provides us with a bit of a home, and kind of like a little bit of a higher policy support for the work, which I think is very much needed. So what are some of these recommendations that we see coming out of the studies and from the discussions and workshops and trainings that we've been having? Well, there's I've grouped them now into 4. So one is really the accountability. Second one is the need for mainstreaming. A third one, advocacy and evidence. And the fourth one is on funding. You can group these in different ways. It depends also a little bit on what background you had, where you're coming from. So, system-wide accountability. Yes, environment is one of the cross-cutting issues, just like age and gender. But so yes, it's everyone's responsibility. At the same time, no one is accountable. Like if you don't do your environmental work, if you don't, implement your environmental standards, no one comes and tells you anything. I mean, even in the Haiti cholera case, unfortunately, we see right how complicated it is to get accountability for this. So there is also a lack of leadership, because all clusters are supposed to work, like the clusters within the humanitarian settings are supposed to work on environment. Some do work on it, some less. There's also not really monitoring of the activities, of the humanitarian programs and projects. There can be individual evaluations done, but then the recommendations are not really picked up. And they are not really operationalized. Rather, we just continue and we go to the next crisis and we do things again. So this thing goes a little bit broader than just environment. I mean, it's generally a thing, of course, also with humanitarian operations. So really, we have seen years of a neglect of the environment, and it should be highlighted again. Mainstreaming. So this is really important. We need to have mainstreaming both vertically, so from the top we need to have environmental policies, we need to link it to the humanitarian policies and programs and tools, but we also need to have horizontal mainstreaming, so collaboration across the technical sectors, also establishing working groups on various topics like, for example, water and sanitation and environment, and also raise awareness and trainings. So, and advocacy and evidence, some of the call from the original study we made was that we needed more evidence. So we conducted these country studies, but still wherever we go, whether it's Chad or Sudan, people are still saying, yeah, okay, you know, but I need now evidence, you know, from my region in this country, how many, you know, like how much money would we gain? What are the exact environmental impacts? So we still need more case studies. And then ultimately what we need is also joint advocacy strategies, because it doesn't help that, you know, we are yelling individually in our, you know, small boxes, but we really need to work together on this. And finally, funding. So donors are in a very crucial role. They can adopt environmental policies, they can demand this of the humanitarian actors that they are supporting. And one interesting thing is, of course, now this whole talk about the linking humanitarian and development work, where we are looking at longer-term financing. Because, of course, we all know that if you implement a project, it's still always short-term. And even though everyone talks and understands that, yes, you know, it will take time to reach results, we are still obliged, you know, to produce results within 2 years or 3 years, which is fairly impossible for some of the longer-term environmental work that we're doing. So really to make environmental considerations worthwhile is key. And then finally, I mean, to end on a positive note, some opportunities, and I think the next presentation will talk a little bit about some of these ongoing reform agendas, the sustainable development goals. I mean, the policy environment is good now. I mean, there's the Paris Agreement, there's opportunity, there's momentum for this. The funding environment is not very good, but I'm sure we can maybe still find ways to work together. There's a big push to link to do more localization in humanitarian aid, so that you make more use of local actors, NGOs, and so on, which is correct. So in that respect, they also know the environment, they know the local context. So that's something that we can make use of. There's expertise and capacities around. I mean, there's lots of environmental NGOs, there's lots of technical expertise. People are just not, you know, linking up and making use of it. We can also build upon the experiences of gender and disaster risk reduction mainstreaming. I mean, that has still worked. You know, maybe not excellent in all situations, but still, that's one thing that we can use. We have existing mechanisms, we have existing initiatives. We should strengthen those rather than just focusing on the problems. And for each of us, you know, whether we are working for an NGO, a donor, or a UN agency, we can become a champion of change and really push for this to change to take place. That's it. Yes.
Amelia, thank you very much. I think that laid out really clearly a whole range of different issues, which we are going to get into more in the discussion after the first break at 11:15. But while Albert and Amanda come up, perhaps I can just ask, are there any sort of questions of clarification that anybody has in the audience right now? While you're thinking, I might just ask one. I was interested, you were talking about how you have you're an environmental unit within a humanitarian organisation. This isn't really a clarification, but just a sort of expansion. But I was just wondering, have you sort of seen a different response from your colleagues over time? Has there been a greater appreciation of environmental issues? Has that been your experience, or has it been more or less the same?
No, for sure. You can see that we have been working on this topic now for 20 plus years. So, for example, we have in the UN disaster assessment and coordination teams that go out very rapidly within 48 hours to respond to sudden onset emergencies. They now are being trained on environmental issues. They have this flash environmental assessment tool, which, okay, focuses on chemical issues, but that is part of their training, and everyone accepts that, yes, this is important, and disaster waste is also important. And I think things like this, really raise the awareness, and many more people now know that the unit exists and expertise is available. But still, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of awareness raising, because people also change, and then you have new people coming in, and then you have to kind of convince them from the start.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Any other final questions? If not, let's have Albert and Amanda to come up. Thank you very much. So Albert and Amanda from the Stockholm Environment Institute are going to present, sort of building on what Emilia was saying, present a mapping of actors and existing partnerships in this whole area of the link between environment and humanitarian action, to sort of get a sense of who the different players are. Again, we'll have a 20-minute presentation and maybe sort of 10 minutes for any questions, immediate burning issues straight after that, and then we'll move to UNHCR. Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie. My name is Albert Salamanca. I'm with the Asia office at the Stockholm Environment Institute, and together with Amanda Cohn, we will present the mapping that we have done. So there are two parts in this presentation. So basically, I'll introduce some concepts on the mapping, and then Amanda will present the interactive part of the mapping exercise using social network analysis. And thanks to Emilia for providing the rationale why mainstreaming is important, and also for highlighting some of the opportunities, for example, the experiences in mainstreaming in gender and in DRR. And okay, it's working. Okay, and so how the mainstreaming within the humanitarian program cycle has three objectives. One, to reduce environmental drivers of conflict and competition. And then the second one is to avoid or potentially mitigate future impacts. And the third one is to ensure that the humanitarian intervention is not only safe, but also environmentally sustainable and resilient. And then, as Emilia discussed already, there are already existing opportunities. There are already actors and stakeholders working in different domains. So the Nexus thinking, we believe, will highlight some of these opportunities. We'll build on these existing initiatives, existing sets of actors and stakeholders. And also, there are different global agendas, and one of them is the Agenda for Humanity, on which see, especially in agenda number 4, on working differently to end need, to think of the environment as a bridge between long-term and short-term visions, and between these two sectors, the humanitarian and the development sectors. And of course, also there's the Secretary General's reform agenda, which highlight the needs for dialogues and conversations, of which, in fact, this dialogue series is one of them. And then we have also the Sustainable Development Goals, and we believe that through the Nexus thinking, we will be able to see how the SDGs could actually contribute to humanitarian action. Achievements of the SDGs. For example, if you look at one of the goals in humanitarian operations on resilient livelihoods, all of this are incorporated also in the different targets within the SDGs. So for example, if you look at target 1.4 in goal 1 could be useful. I'm not sure whether you can read it, but that's in relation to poverty. And then target 5.6 on goal 5 on women's equal rights. So all of these components within the SDG will contribute to resilient livelihoods also, which is an important part in humanitarian operations. So by thinking in all of these different linkages, we'll achieve co-benefits in the work that we do. And then to highlight this further, if we look at the goals of mainstreaming, reducing exposure, improving resilience, and ensuring sustainability, and then we map out some of the targets within the SDGs, we will find out that, or we can actually make the argument that basically all of the SDGs will contribute to the mainstreaming goals. But in particular, like if you look at all these different targets, so 1.3 is on a nationally appropriate social protection schemes that could certainly contribute to the reduction in the exposure, or target 3.9 on substantial reduction of chemical deaths, or deaths, number of deaths due to chemical exposure and contamination. Our target 12.4 on the management of chemicals. So all of these different targets would actually, if you start mapping them, would contribute to the goals of mainstreaming. Similarly with improving resilience. So again, we have target 1.3 and then target 11.7b on the adoption of the Sendai framework, or 13.1, which is linked also with the Paris Agreement. So all of this could achieve our mainstreaming objectives within the Humanitarian program cycle. And then if you look at ensuring sustainability, all these targets also linked. So like target 9.1 is on quality and reliable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure. Or in target 17.4 on policy coherence. So we can think of these different sectors. So you've got environmental management on one side and the humanitarian on the other. But we can always think of them as separate, but we also have a choice to think in terms of their commonalities, in terms of their common interests, in terms of the opportunities that each of the sectors have and what they contribute to each other's work. So, like in the case of environmental threats, which can actually impact, regardless of what sector you are, the threat could affect, of course, the environmental sector and, of course, the humanitarian side. And the example that Emilia mentioned is relevant in this case. So, for example, the lack of waste management in Darfur has led to the spread of a disease-carrying vector and the contamination of water source, which in turn affect all the other aspects of the humanitarian intervention. So there's this cyclical threat multiplier that would happen if we fail to address some of these important environmental concerns. And it's all the more critical, especially when you bring in the context of climate change, wherein, I'm sure you're very familiar with the literature, wherein climate change itself could be the source of the humanitarian crisis. And given that into the future, climate change is basically a reality, so we need to look at this in the context of humanitarian intervention, because climate change also has the potential to become a threat multiplier, and in certain contexts, it becomes also an existential concern. So climate change could reinforce existing environmental threats or environmental problems or social or developmental concerns, or they could impede the realizations of certain development or humanitarian objectives. So thinking in terms of all this dynamics and relationship is really crucial. And now, in terms of, so this figure sort of introduces the mapping that we have done, and what the next presentation is going to show is to look at who are the different actors within the humanitarian environment nexus, what are the different initiatives, the data, the resources that's available. And for that, Amanda, my colleague from SCIUS, will present that mapping exercise.
Thank you, Albert. Can everyone hear me okay? I have a quiet voice, so okay. So the next slide here has a link if you are on your computer. The visualization works well on that in comparison to on a phone. And you are welcome to join along while we go through this, but it also is available on the website. And no, we don't get to pick our own tiny URL. Otherwise, we'd pick something maybe a little more easier to remember. So it's kind of a random little link there. But this is giving an overall view, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the tool itself here. And while it's loading, I'll tell you a bit about what the tool is currently built on. And we wanted to first off say that this isn't comprehensive, and there's a lot of data currently in the tool, but it's something that can continue to grow and to be modified, and specifically be improved through expertise other than the expertise we have at SCI, because people sitting in this room are working more closely with this material and can better inform what's already on here. Also, one thing that is missing is these routine operational partnerships that don't have names. So often we see maybe sister agencies working together, or different UN agencies or nonprofits working together in a routine basis, but it's maybe isn't named something, or it's not often written down, or there isn't a procedure for which it goes through, and that's not captured on here. Which maybe there is documentation available, but maybe even thinking about how do we make these routine relationships and partnerships an entry point to mainstream the environment is something to really think about, rather than these one initiatives that Amelia was talking about. So this was also built, so you can't see it on here, can you? So this is the interface. And one thing that informed this was from the first dialogue, we heard that there's a lack in coordination on data sources, but also needing to go to all of these different places to find different trainings, find different guidelines. And so this was kind of built in an idea that it could serve as a central place to find that. And perhaps if there are different guidelines on waste management, if we found a particular guideline that we could all agree upon as the central focus, we could put it into this tool as a simple place for people to go and look at. I think another important thing of this is that it could be used at the local level. You could do similar mapping to say, this is the data available for this country, these are the initiatives happening in this country. And so these are the types of resources that are available in the tool currently, and again, this could be growing. But looking at what are the different data portals that are available, what are the current initiatives going on, what are the guidelines and handbooks that we have available to us. And if you're interested, for example, just in data portals, you can use the tool to focus in and see what is available to you. And when you click on the background, you can get the menu back. But these are the actors that we currently have represented in the tool. And if you're interested in what they're working on, and again, maybe you're interested in data portals, you could see that these agencies are working on these data portals, or that they host them on their websites or continue to update them. And overall, this shows all of the connections that these agencies have to the different types of resources available. And again, you could use this and focus in on what different agencies are doing. So if you were interested in what the joint unit was doing, you could focus in again and see the different things that they're working on, and do that for any of the agencies in the tool. And this could potentially lead to partnerships, but also could lead to more efficiency, in that we're not duplicating something that's already being done in other agencies. And the graphics that Albert was showing earlier that show the humanitarian environment with environmental management and the connections are also available in that link through this hyperlink. And in that you can see the SDGs that connect those. And so we'll see if it'll come up here. When you hover over these and click on one, these are the goals that connect those to different sector interests. And so just know that that's also available for further use after today. So overall, our message is that coordination is really needed, that this is a complex nexus, and I'll pass it back over to Albert to give us some final messages.
So thanks a lot, Amanda. So as you've seen in this particular diagram, in particular, that once you look at the nexus, it gets really messy. But maybe there's a message behind this messiness, that there's a dynamics involved between actors, between nodes, between organizations, between programs. And there's also an emerging complexity, and maybe that complexity is manifestation of the institutional landscape. So if you want to resolve coordination issues, maybe we have to look at what's behind this picture and try to understand. And hopefully that could be the start of the conversation, that a lot of interesting work is ongoing, a lot of interesting initiatives, but we lack coordination, that possibly because there's really an underlying institutional challenge that we might need to resolve. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that very interesting presentation. Again, I think it really set out this sense that there's a tremendously complex area, and that when you look at it at first, there's perhaps a sense of chaos and diversity, but that there are tools to really delve into it and look at the interconnections and so on. I think that's incredibly powerful, and I would thoroughly recommend everybody to play around with the tool, because it's only really when you dive into it that you actually see some of those interventions. And all of us, we tend to be blinkered in the ways in which we exist already, and it's very easy to sort of forget about other initiatives, other organizations, other things that are going on that are outside of our immediate field of vision. Are there any immediate questions for clarification? Thank you.
I think we're going to need a mic, sorry. Sorry, it's just for the broadcast.
Leila from Chatham House and the Moving Energy Initiative. The tool is really interesting. Are you actively updating it? How do you keep it up to date? And are you expecting organisations to contribute to that update?
So we are accepting updates, and I think that's a great thing about this tool, and that we hope it does grow and can grow to be even more useful, because the more info we have from different organizations, the more robust it can be, and the more helpful I think it can be. And we do hope it will continue to grow in that way. And so if you are interested in adding, I can give you my email, and I'll be able to update the tool. And it actually, if you have an interest, it was very quick to learn. So if you wanted to map your own organization to different ones, as long as you have Excel, you can use this tool, and it's free for public projects, which can also be nice if you were working with countries and wanted to do something similar. It is a free resource.
So another thing also is that we would encourage you to please try the tool, because maybe you would be able to improve and fine-tune really the relationships between the nodes, because some of them might have a particular nuance in the relationship that which we may not be able to capture, and you might think it's really sort of direct, but maybe there are some intermediaries that particular flow of information has to go through that we fail to capture. So if you have those realizations, then it can also help us fine-tune the tool, if you can let us know.
Very good. Well, let's move on. Thank you very much indeed for that presentation. It was tremendously interesting. We've been talking. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I just want to bring in a point of reservation or just clarification that the information which is contained in the mapping tool is by no means comprehensive. So it is just an example to show how the methodology works and the value of it in terms of mapping the common resources and that the agencies have that they can share and how it works. So it remains very incomplete. We could actually point out to specific organizations and say which resources they have or what actions they have done, but we did not do that intentionally because we didn't want to prejudge or estimate something that has not been peer reviewed and also verified by the respective organizations. But we can actually go to that level, that it goes to agency by agency. But we didn't go that way intentionally. So just to bring that words of clarifications to understand. Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Important clarification. So if I can just ask, we've talked about the issues, we've talked about some of the sort of family tree of different initiatives and organizations that are going on. Let's delve into how particular organizations are dealing with this. And if I can ask Amari to come up and give some experiences from the UNHCR side, particularly around coordinating assessments for environment and humanitarian action. Thank you very much. So you have 15 minutes and then a few minutes for any questions for clarification.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I think the two presentations, they have really set out the scene nicely. They really discussed the importance of mainstreaming environment into the humanitarian operations, and they have also raised the issue of tools and ended up with also deal with coordination. And finally, the conclusion is coordination is critical. Yes, coordination is needed. That is why we have these joint initiatives, collaborations between USAID, the OCHA, the UN Environment, MSP, and IUCN, as well as WFP, of course, UNHCR. This one? Yeah. All right. Maybe as a background, just to add only one thing. Today, the number of displaced people estimated at 65.3 million, an increase of 50% compared to the figure of 2012. And most of these displaced people, they live in a very vulnerable regions, what we call the climate change hotspot. More droughts, more intense rains, more intense flooding, storm, and all of that. And the situation is again aggravated because these displaced people, mostly they are located in a very small camps where they rely mostly on the environment, on the natural environment for food, water, shelter, fuel wood, and others. And this one has led degradation of the environment. And not only this problem is compounded by the long stay of the displaced people. I think in our mindset it is temporary, but the average, if we calculate particularly the refugee camps, the average stay comes out about 26 years. 26 years is the average stay of a camp. So in all of our mind, be it in the mindset of the donors, the relief workers ourselves, the national government, the refugee, the displaced people themselves, they think everything is temporary, as if we will be back home the next day. So this temporary mindset affected really the environment. So it is very crucial to integrate environment in the humanitarian action. And for this, we need really strengthen the coordination between the two actors. I think the joint initiative, the main aim is how we can improve the use of this data for humanitarian programming. So with the aim of improving the lives, oh, I think I have a problem with, do you have the normal, yeah. Yes, with the main objective of improving the lives and livelihood by supporting the humanitarian action. And again, this action needs a very strong coordination between the two sectors and also the timeline before happening the disasters and after the disasters, even during the recovery period. Maybe, thank you. So why these initiatives? Probably let me pick really some of the challenges in the coordination and use of the environmental assessment. I said environment is a low priority, and usually we have very limited accessibility to environmental data. And just for the previous presenter, they have really mapped out the tools. There are so many tools developed by different agencies for different purposes, and this is also what we have seen. And also most of these tools are not well linked with the humanitarian programming cycle. And also the uptake, whatever assessments we did, the uptake of putting those results into action is limited. And so these assessments are not translated into programs or into actions. That is also the situation on the situation in the humanitarian sphere. And lack of clarity on what tools to inform at what level of programming. What tools can we use during emergency? What tools can we on the onset of disasters? And what inputs should be used maybe post the disasters, maybe with the timeline. Those are not really clear. Thank you. Oh, that's good. And so the joint initiatives, they have really come up. There is a need to facilitate really data and the information sharing platforms. And there is also a need to update the tools themselves, to revise the existing tools. So the intention, the efforts of the joint initiatives is to look to create a framework for environmental humanitarian action that serves the different entry pointers at the different levels. That might be on the preparedness level, and also the response, the disaster response, and how we fit in also with the national level, the national coordination, and how we translate this into actions, into programs, so that we have really interventions on the ground to address the issue of environment. So the key components of the projects and the achievement to date include the following. Number one is the project did really very extensive stakeholder consultations with a range of agencies, with a range of expertise in the area of environment and both humanitarian sectors. So the specific activities, of course, include Again, the consultation of over 100 individuals, ranging from humanitarian to academia. You can see how the inputs provided by these various individuals through the consultation process. And the initiative also, they presented their work into the interagency standing committee event. I think we have really received valuable inputs from that. And there was also a consultation, a stakeholder consultation workshop in Geneva, where quite a number of attendee participants were there, again representing different agencies and clusters. I think the inputs we have really got from that forum helped to shape the framework itself. And also that we have used the opportunity in Nairobi, Kenya, during the Environmental Emergency Forum here. Also, there was really quite a number of participants in the side event, again contributing to the work. So still, these activities will continue, and at the end of this month, I think there will be another consultation of stakeholders in DC, in Washington, DC. I hope all of these will strengthen the tool itself. The other area is the joint initiative. They did also mapping of the available tools. I think similar to the earlier presentation, I think that this work will be very complementary to ours, and I think we will really, we are lucky Mandy, who is the lead of this initiative, is here, and so I think she picked all of these inputs, and whenever you have questions, she's the main pilot, I'm the co-pilot, so you can really dig some of the questions to her. Next, please. The terms of specific activities, I said, I think we did the mapping, environment humanitarian action assessment tools, and we have really various tools developed by various agencies. And also we have started outlining the framework itself. So I don't think whether this is readable or not, the one in blue, these are the different tools by the different agencies. Some of the tools are advisory, the blue ones are the advisory, and some of these, the orange color, they are also technical and compliant. I think FAO frame is UNHCR. Even in terms of time, UNHCR started from the level of in preparedness, and then technical and compliance. And the green color represents agencies who developed a tool on an advisory basis. So it's not something obligatory, but it is recommended to use. And then I think it also includes both the emergency and both the preparedness and the response timeline. The other work related with data and the information sharing platform. I think the initiative, they managed to design and launch a website. I think Monday is here to explain what that website includes, what it lacks, and anyway, this is the beginning, and probably we need also your inputs on that. And again, they did the analysis of existing online platforms and what are the gaps, how we improve, and also the initiative did a guidance note and also mapping of environmental sources. I think again the earlier presentation by the other group will fit quite well to here. What are some of the key learnings? Number one, building the relationship between environment and humanitarian action takes really time. It's not easy. I mean, it is easy to say mainstreaming environment into the operation, mainstreaming environment into the humanitarian action. UNHCR has been really trying this over years, and still we are running our environmental program as a standalone, and it's not really well mainstreamed into the different sectors. And again, speaking of the same language, I think the MLE and the others, they define what is really environment means. What is environment for UNHCR? What is environment for OCHA? What is environment for the UN itself? So some focused on the natural resources, some on pollution, chemicals. So I think we need to have really to speak the same language if we want really to establish a tool that can serve for all of us. So it's not easy. So we have to really understand, define the term self-environment. Of course, still I support Emalia. Environment has been read for long, even if environment we are learning in the school saying that everything surrounding you is environment, be it the biological or the physical, whatever the case. So I still there. So again, this study helped us to, there are many environmental assessment tools. There is no such a common approach. We need to harmonize. We need really, where is the communality, where we can really work together, where we can also keep our flexibility. And maybe finally, the humanitarian users need again environmental data at different levels. And we have seen the different levels with a different entry point. So there is nothing one size that fits all. So we have to build within the system, within the framework, some flexibility. So the final one is what are the next steps? Of course, for the initiative, the next steps is one, we want to further work and finalize the framework. And again, the identification and implementation of priority activities within that environment. What are the priorities? Where should we focus? Where are the communalities for most of us? I think we need to identify those issues and setting up also a working group for that. And finally, we need also to revise the tools themselves. Once we have agreed methodology, we wanted to pilot that revised methodology in one or two places. And I think these are the next steps for our initiatives. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, as I said, you are direct in the pilot or the co-pilot. Even Emalia is also here, which is part of the initiative, one of the core teams from the initiative.
Amari, thank you very much indeed. Your piloting was exactly on time as well. So
oh, good.
Swiss precision in terms of the timekeeping. We have just a couple of minutes for any questions of clarification. Any additions that Mandy, if you wanted to make, or Gleda? You have this 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Amari. It's really interesting to hear about how this has moved on, and I wanted to mention that something that the Moving Energy Initiative is doing with OCHA, the Humanitarian Data Exchange part of OCHA, to map the energy access picture, globally, and it would be really great if this data could somehow feed into what you're doing, and because we, like FEI, we really want people to actively improve on the data that's there, because of course that was a big finding of our global assessment, that the data was very, very poor. So it's very difficult to do this kind of analysis as to what would make most economic sense in a certain context.
Let's just take one more, and then we have Isabel back there.
Hello, Isabella Maras from UN Environment. As Amari knows, I coordinate an initiative that tracks greenhouse gas emissions waste management from UN facilities and operation, but we're also looking now at understanding how all this happens in agencies that work on the field. And I would like to understand, Amari, when you say data, what is data? I mean, are we talking about I don't know, availability of water? Are we talking about greenhouse gas emissions or waste management post? Once the camps are installed, can I have more an idea of what data you're looking for? Thank you.
Yeah, if you ask me as UNHCR, for us, data is waste. Data is on natural resources, land degraded due to the presence of refugees. Data would mean how we are extracting the resources from the natural environment. Data would mean water and all of this. I think we are dealing with the whole range of issues, except of course as such chemicals. But data for the initiatives might be also, that is why we said identification of activities where we can have a communalities. I think that's the understanding I have, because I have the privilege of Mandy. Probably she can intervene. For me, as a joint, when you come as a joint, if you provide me collecting toxic materials when we establish a camp, probably we don't have the capacity. Probably, of course, we have some toxic chemicals that, compared to the damage done to the environment, might be less relevant to us. So I think we will agree when we say data, what data could be commonly in the platform. I think once we have the platform, it is up to the specific agency, if we have agreed methodology, to pick this is the data I need, and this is the gap which I should really collect, and then it will avoid some duplication workers. I think that data should be well defined, and definitely the joint initiative will not cover the whole range of data and area of environment. As I said, we have to agree even the definition where to focus on, and then once we narrow down, then we will work on that. Mandy, please feel free.
Yes, it's a very good question, and I think we're dealing most specifically with assessments, so with assessment data and the kind of environmental data that can be useful for the assessment process, which is still very broad. But we also like to say information and data, because a lot of, I think that kind of broadens it out to, for example, immediately after a disaster, we'd like to know, what are the kind of key environmental issues facing that country that we can prepare in a kind of preparedness phase, like a quick list of these are the main issues facing this country, therefore these probably will be sensitive issues that we should consider after the disaster at the kind of global disaster-wide level. So yeah, I like to say information and data because I think that broadens it out a little bit, but it is a very broad term. So we're very focused on how can we translate some of the environmental data that's useful into the humanitarian system. So thinking about what are some of the common operational data sets that OCHA uses, for example, that can be taken from environmental data and integrated into the system and that kind of thing. So kind of focusing on translating that data into the humanitarian system so that it's really practical and relevant for humanitarians to use, because there's so much out there, and it's a big question. So I hope that helps answer the question.
Quick point from Elliot.
I confess to being somewhat more confused now than I was at the beginning of the morning. If, as you say, we have an average duration of stay in the camp of 26 years, it would seem to be that over the course of that time, the burning issues of environmental concern will become apparent. And I suspect that you'll have similar types of constraints and problems in different locations, even though they won't be identical. Is the problem that we know what data we need, but we just don't have it? Or is the problem that we don't know what kind of data we need? It's just not clear from the presentations, for me, where the problem actually lies. Given the duration of the issue that we're facing, it's very hard to conceive that we don't know what we need to know.
If I could, sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, you go ahead, and then
I think often we know what we need, but sometimes we can't access it, and I think that's where working together across the two sectors is really powerful, because conservation organizations, environmental organizations have been present in countries for years and years and years. They probably have that information, that data. Humanitarians come in, need access to that, and maybe can't get it in the way that they need at the time that they need through the systems that they need. So that's some of the things that we're looking at in this project, is how can we bridge that gap by making that information accessible to humanitarians in the right format at the right time. And especially the opportunities in protracted crises are there, because like you say, this is not a short-term thing. We know the issues, and there's more opportunities there.
Well, actually, we know the problem, especially when I talk about refugee camps, where we have these protracted case loads, but of course we have limited with budget, and also maybe the data poorly collected. There's a poor data, and definitely I would agree, because as a humanitarian agency, our major focus is on relief on the major core sectors like health, wash, and non-food items, but not so much priorities given So there is also a difference between with disaster and with conflict situation. With conflict situation, usually the environmental problems are slow onset. It's not really fast as the disaster. So we can have data, but this data, they are not really well organized, maybe not in a usable manner. That's what we need. And also we are using our own tool, which is not climate proven, which is not universally accepted. I think most of the agencies, we do have those tools, and those tools are not really commonly accepted by that organization. And we thought of having this a joint one. We will have, somehow a standardized set. Of course, we have to allow again flexibility within it, how we deal with conflict situation, how we deal with disasters, and having that, probably we can have a common approach. That's really why we are really pushing ahead with the joint initiative. Otherwise, still it will be something complementary to the existing tools we have, and then we will know also what kind of data we will get from others when we have such a common approach. I don't know whether I have answered, somehow tried when the two response combined. I hope. Otherwise, you can. Okay.
Amari, thank you very much indeed. What I wanted to do now was to turn to a sort of parallel challenge, which is dealing with one of the other major footprints, perhaps the major footprint of the UN system, which is peacekeeping. So the 140, 150,000 troops that the UN is deploying at any one time. And I wanted to invite Andrew Morton, who is working on a project with the Department for Field Services, to talk a little bit about that. And I'm very happy to see he's a UN person who's not wearing a suit, which I think is extremely healthy. So, Andrew, over to you. There's a mic there for you.
Okay, whilst they sort out the IT, can everybody hear me? Okay, so the mic works. Okay, I see an audience that's desperate for coffee and looking at their phones. So I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to participate to start. When the microphone gets up, it'll be really useful. First question I'm going to ask you, make some educated guesses, and then I'm going to give you our guess. First one is, how big is foreign aid field operations as a business per annum? Any ideas? How many billion dollars per annum? I need a volunteer, a guess, somebody.
20.
40.
200.
20, 40, 200. Our educated guess is around 30 to 40 billion per annum. Second question. So how much of that in percentage in dollar terms of that money goes into buying and transporting the diesel fuel just for the generators to run electricity in your foreign aid compounds? How much of that? Any guesses? 5? 10? Any others? Okay, our best educated guess from all the data we have is 2.5% of total aid spend is going into diesel fuel for generators for electricity. So that's around 500 million per annum. The third question, how much do you think it costs to keep in energy services a blue helmet in the field in the Sahara Desert per annum? How many $1,000 per annum? How many $1,000 per annum does it cost to service the energy needs of one blue helmet peacekeeper in the Sahara Desert?
$1,000.
1,000. Any others? For a year, per annum.
10,000.
Okay, we calculate about 12 to 15,000. Okay, the final question. What's the difference? What's the opportunity for improvement between current case and best case for such a situation where you improve the generation, distribution, and the use of the energy? How much are you going to save in the long run, in percentage? Any guesses? Any guesses? What's good? 20? 30? Any others? Any other bids? 50. 50? Anybody else decides to be quiet? Yes, you get it. At least 50% is what we see. We can save up to 30% in demand you can save at least 20% in improved generation, just using diesel generators, and you can save maybe 15 to 20% through renewables. Add all that up, it's at least 50%. So it's big money. Right, on to the boring part, the presentation. Okay, so I work leading a team that helps, attempts to green the peacekeepers. So I'm going to put the message in a fairly blunt way that a soldier can understand. To go truly green, rather than just talk about green, or even worse, advertise green, otherwise known as greenwash. The first thing is get organised. It's a prerequisite, as is get funded. The second is get technical. You need the technical resource. The third is getting together. It's shared facilities and services. And the fourth is get radical. Sometimes we need to really do something transformative to change the situation. Next slide. So get technical. What does that mean and why do we need it? Well, look at what actually is involved in greening your compound. Let's start with behavioural. Okay, so you don't use the printer as much. You have a shorter shower when you're in the desert. You turn off the lights. You turn down the air conditioning. You separate your waste. Okay, you've got past all that first stage. The next level, you need to start investing in equipment and infrastructure. And some of that is fairly complicated machinery. So you need to select, design, procure, import, build, commission, operate and maintain these things. So for that, you need technical people. You need engineers, scientists, financial modelers, and you need them for a sustained period. For about 26 years, the average age of a peacekeeping mission is 16 years. So you need that workforce around. Okay, pass through that. Here's an example of one team that we put together. So what we are, we're a surge capacity to help peacekeepers move the needle a little bit towards being a bit more green. So you see the scale, over 3.5 years, we'll spend $7 million just on personnel. The team is myself and about 6 permanents and another 4 or 5 consultancies. And we need at least double that from what I calculate. So we have electrical engineers, environmental management specialists, waste management engineers, waste and wastewater, hazardous waste specialists, hydrogeologists, etc. Full spectrum of highly specialised cases. So you cannot get that. You cannot get that by just clicking your fingers. You need to figure out how to recruit and retain that. And they're not core skills you see often in the humanitarian sector. Okay, so next slide. Yes. Okay, getting together, joint facilities and services. Now the current approach, I have to say, when I look at the deployment of foreign aid field operations, essentially is fragmentation. Individual servicing of needs which are almost identical for accommodation, for transport, for electricity, for water and wastewater, solid waste management. Everybody's doing their own thing in their own compound next to each other. So in this respect, scale and continuity really count. You look at all the things that we take for granted here, you see scale and continuity. A sewage treatment plant will life for 50 years. Electrical grid, huge size. So you cannot get to a certain level of quality of environmental impact and performance efficiency unless you go to scale and you get continuous. So to do that, you need to look at joining up the services, the one UN house model, shared facilities, etc. So you'll improve performance, save money, and reduce the footprint. To give you a simple example, the difference between 50 porta cabins baking in the desert with air conditioners running at full bore versus one big building with an integrated air conditioning system, it's about 50% difference in energy costs. You cannot do that with your porta cabin. You have to join up. The next. Okay, this final one is going radical. Now, what has happened is we've looked at power generation across the foreign aid sector. We've looked at whether it can be done in-house and whether we can outsource it. And actually we found in both cases we couldn't solve it. It's really hard to get economy of scale with each individual agency. And at the moment, there isn't a happy market where the private sector can come in. It's too insecure, too unstable, too risky, too much corruption. So what we've done is said we need to do a internal outsourcing. So the concept is UN Office for Project Services and the Environment are starting an initiative for essentially an in-house UN electrical utility. So we will sell you electricity. And we'll go places where the market will not. So we'll keep you posted on how that goes, but it integrates all of the ideas we've seen before. And because it's an economic case, we will save money this way. We believe we can bring in investors, we can bring in debt, we can actually start to get some real infrastructure coming into the country and leave a positive legacy. Okay, thanks for your attention. Look forward to questions.
Very good, thank you very much. Any questions of clarification, experiences, and so on? Perhaps I can start. Andrew, can you just talk a little bit about why this started in the first place? The overall REACT project. I mean, what was the impetus from the Department of Peacekeeping Operations for this kind of approach?
If I was a cynic, I'd say that they're looking for the green label, but I'm not. So I'll say that they were very interested in the expertise available in UN environment, and they recognised that they needed some expertise, which was not available in the core personnel. So they've been chipping away for a while, but several years ago we sort of said, okay, get serious with the money, whether it's us or somebody else, but you really need to go to scale. They answered the challenge, so we picked up and did a decent sized technical assistance project, which we still think is 50% undersized. So that's how it started. For those who wish to start that process themselves, it's going to take this peacekeepers 6 to 10 years to fully reform. So if you want to move on your own organisation, you need to really get that sort of timeline. And also look at serious investment, because you cannot do it with no money. It's all about capital investments to reap savings thereafter. You need to invest.
Draw the analogy to building efficiency. It's always much more expensive and difficult to retrofit a building than to build a new building up to certain standards. Now, is there a commitment, political or otherwise, that any new operations will conform to these kinds of environmental standards? And that should be, I think, at least in my mind, it would be a different approach, similar in some aspects, a different approach to trying to retrofit the existing peacekeeping missions, because there you have to overcome some of the inertia of what's already there. How is that being looked at? I'm not suggesting that we need to look forward to additional new peacekeeping operations, but past track record says we need to be prepared.
Yeah, I'd come back to the approach as to why we've gone for this radical solution. Essentially, you should regard these agencies, peacekeepers, others, as short-term tenants who aren't allowed to sign a long-term contract. But if you do statistics, if you look at a market, for example, an airline does not ask contractors, passengers, to give a long-term contract. They just sort of give an estimate as to how many passengers are going to turn up, and then they buy the aircraft, or they lease the aircraft in this case. I think you need to move and say, it's always going to be Security Council annual mandates for peacekeepers. But if you look at the average spend, it's always going to be over 8 billion per annum, unless the world suddenly got peaceful. So you've got 8 billion per annum being spent in these areas. They all need housing, they all get a DSA allowance. Now maybe you need another one, which is UN property, which comes in and says, we know you're going to be here for a generation, so we're going to build everything, and you're going to live here, and we're going to charge you serious rent, because that's what's happening now. Believe me, the elite of these countries are charging serious rent for defunct old mansions that are extremely inefficient, that we retrofit, and then we leave after about 10 years of repeating short-term leases. So the opportunities are there outside of the restrictions of the individual mandates, such as peacekeepers or humanitarians, etc. So we're looking at return on investment for some of these things in about 5 years. So if I was infinitely rich, I could make a fortune out of the UN, because they just keep on paying forever. on a short-term basis. At the moment, the markets are a little bit scared of where the UN is, but overall the economics are really clear. It will pay for itself. It's just a case of how to get the capital in. People are searching for 3% yield on investments elsewhere. I calculate minimum 15-20% yield in some of these areas. Even if you buffer for bad debt and risk, you're still over 10%. So.
Great. Peter.
Thank you. Really interesting numbers. We'd love to include them in a guide we're producing for humanitarian MGUs at the moment. I wanted to ask you about this though. Do you see it as an actual utility, like a company that behaves like a company within the UN, or more like a procurement facility that is able to be flexible to bring on partners in countries?
Yeah. First of all, the procurement's running your operation, you're already dead. As you know, because it's a constraint, not a service. The idea is it's a voluntary service, a non-profit organisation that ploughs back revenue, cost recovery-based services, ploughs back the revenue into doing more projects, helping the country, build infrastructure, which we'll at a later stage hand on. So building power lines, power stations, solar farms, leasing property, etc. And then moving on when the situation clears. Knowing that we can sell on those assets to probably national companies. So it is basically looking at a non-cost centre, okay? A business, social enterprise.
Last point from what you just said there raises the spectre of long-term development. And so I ask if it is conceived to be a bridge between moving from the humanitarian disaster relief aspect into the longer-term development. If it is UNDP more?
Well, the first thing is it's just starting. The second is that everybody who buys electricity from this thing will be part of it because you finance it. You don't have to run it yourself. It's a service provider. So if people wish to come in as founding partners and offer facilities, expertise and capital, it's going to be a partnership. I think at the moment, I calculate in the end, it'll be probably 50, 60 members, maybe 10 different companies, 20 different NGOs, 40 countries. So we're going to build it gradually, but yeah, everybody's welcome. Even those who aren't welcome, and some of those who aren't sort of enthusiastic at the end, I suspect that when they're sitting next to an organisation that's running 24/7 power happily, and their own generator breaks down, they'll join the club. So.
Can I ask questions?
Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Juliet Bacha. I'm an environmentalist and humanitarian based in Geneva with civil society since many years. Peacekeeping operation, peacekeeping missions are reality after Security Council resolution voted by states members. It's political actions with the states' contributions, financial contributions, and part of their own army. But during armed conflict or post-armed conflict, if the context is needed for peacekeeping missions on the field, can you tell me how peacekeeping operation missions are really can be an actor in humanitarian context if they promise sanctions later for the population, for the government?
Well, you pick up the roles of the different players. Okay, so the peacekeepers typically do not get involved in the sanctions, which are a political act, and then they hit normally a small part of the population. The key thing is you've got several thousand personnel spending a lot of money and deploying and hopefully securing the environment, so they are a major actor. There is nowhere that peacekeepers are that humanitarians are not. They're all there in one big club. So it's their extended presence that actually can have an impact. Even if you can say by having peacekeeping it's a disaster that doesn't happen. There's no conflict after the mandate and they continue there, then they fade away. You've spent several billion over say 10, 15 years. That's your impact actually, aside from the the conflict that didn't happen. So you can do it. Sanctions, well, look at what sanctions are happening in the world and their impact on the day-to-day business on the ground. You actually wouldn't notice in some of the countries with the tougher sanctions to the average person in the street, except for things such as, say, fuel embargo or high technology, etc., for which the UN is exempt. We can bring it in and use it, but maybe some other countries can't. So it's not really a factor.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We've got 17 minutes left before coffee, and I promised to finish on time. We have two more very quick presentations where we wanted to take advantage of two things, really. One is Tim Scott from UNDP, just to give us 5 minutes on UNDP's experience of enhancing environmental and social sustainability through coherent safeguards. And then the second is Professor Basilio Montero, who's going to just give us a very quick overview of, there's been an extensive e-discussion before this. So as you can see, this whole event is being webcast, streamed around the world. There's been an e-discussion in the run-up to that. So we're trying to sort of make the footprint of this dialogue and this discussion wider than this room. So we want to have some feedback from the professor on that. And then what we'll do is we'll go and charge up with coffee and come back, and I'm really going to start putting you guys to work in terms of coming up with some ideas about what we do next. So, Tim, please.
Thanks very much. I was actually expecting to speak after the coffee break, but I'm glad I've been paying attention. I didn't sneak out for coffee. On the spot. So, yeah, I appreciate this very much, and I'll be sharing some updates on what UNDP has been doing in this space, mainly the challenges and just a few forward-looking thoughts, which kind of leads into the after coffee break session as well. Elliot, in your opening, you rightly made several good points, including about the need to move beyond shorter and medium-term project-based approaches. But having said that, I'm going to share a bit about what we're doing around UNDP's programming for our crisis response and early recovery and mainstreaming work. So, like many other agencies and organizations here, our response to crisis brings together different parts of our house: expertise, information, and systems, including our bureau, what we call our Bureau for Program Policy Support, with its environmental mainstreaming expertise, and a special unit that we have, which is our crisis response unit. Like as we've heard today, there are many tools for assessing and integrating government functions, including local governance, aid management, civil service, and then kind of the bigger governance functions around national recovery planning and coordination. So these aren't new topics. These are just codified in this slightly broader set of tools that we immediately go on more into the development side. As many agencies and groups here, we also have developed a system of social and environmental standards, which is applied internally to all of our programs, all of our products, across all regions, and including in crisis recovery and emergency response contexts. I think most of us are familiar with what these types of standards are, but just briefly, they strengthen the social and environmental outcomes of every program, and this means avoiding the negative impacts that we've been hearing about. And when avoidance is impossible, they just help minimize and mitigate adverse impacts. They go beyond that to strengthen capacities. We talked a lot about the need for building capacities around managing social and environmental risks, and they also emphasize stakeholder engagement, which we all recognize as being critical. We also use other tools. We use the UN Environments tool, the environmental marker, and other tools. So there's no shortage of tools, no shortage of data, but often, as we heard earlier, it's a challenge of connecting these data, both within our organization and with other partners. So, in fact, we did a preliminary assessment of how we're doing, and there are many gaps within our organization of how we're applying these tools. So for these reasons, we of course appreciate this Nexus dialogue very much, and a lot has been going on prior to this Nexus dialogue, and so with the UNDP, there have been ongoing discussions, and we very much look forward to linking to the joint initiative on, I have to look at the name, of the coordination of assessments for environment, humanitarian action. It's a big one. And in that, it means very much looking to learning from and sharing experiences with your environment, with OSHA, UNHCR, WF, USAID, and other partners, including those in the room who have also spoken, and others outside this room.
Is we have this experience of sort of institutional, behavioural, organisational change at an individual organisational level, and then there's this challenge of how do we sort of get system-wide change into a new way of doing things in recognition of the challenges that we face. That I think have really come out very strongly. Are there any initial sort of burning questions for Tim on the UNDP experience around safeguards? If not, let's turn to the professor just to give us a few minutes on a sort of overview of what's really come out of some of these discussions from around the world that we can take into our coffee break, swallow with our coffee, and come back refreshed and refueled for the discussion afterwards.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to moderate this discussion for the last couple of weeks, almost 3 weeks, I think, that we did. And the way I try to frame these discussions, not being a member of the UN family, I was coming as an outsider, and my whole question was, the big frame I wanted to put around it was, it is a problem of communication. And so that was the larger frame. How are we communicating this expertise that you all have here and down to the people, the masses, the common general public? And so I tried to frame a few questions around this particular concern of communication, because a lot of expertise is here and sits within the UN, if I may use the term affectionately, within the UN bubble. And that bubble somehow, they remain so confined to each other, and this expertise never gets disseminated to the common person. So there was some very good discussions, and if you had a chance to go and read the comments, it would be helpful. But I'm going to summarize here some of the things that in 3 categories. The first category is, what are the challenges that you have come across in integrating environment with humanitarian action? Lack of long-term planning and environmental considerations in general economic activity, specifically production and consumption. For example, the design and construction of infrastructure, no consideration. And what has happened is that this is also a political ideology also has played a role in the last at least 300 years. And that is, environment has not been part of the equation of development. So the model of development, what is development? And that has been, I think, the underlying concern. So public policy vis-a-vis development has been and continues to be focused on using, and I would say exploiting, natural resources to maximum profit in the shortest amount of time. The corporate business model, where stockholders are primary beneficiaries, continues to be the norm of business practice, which contributes to the reckless use of resources and one of the main drivers of human-made humanitarian crisis. So public in general has not been able to see a cause-effect relationship in environmental degradation and current humanitarian crisis. And also, the anthropocentric view, which tries to domesticate and control nature, continues to remain, although deeply seriously failed, but a deeply ingrained paradigm, a deeply ingrained conviction that that is how life has to go on. So we are battling this kind of thinking, this kind of structure has been put in place for 200 years in the time of the Industrial Revolution, and we are carrying on. So until unless I think we start rethinking about these things, yes, the efforts will become efforts to address this issue will have some benefit, will be very incremental. The other category was what good practices, experience, lessons can we build on. Thankfully, there are a lot of good things that have been done. In fact, I just read this morning that in India, there is among many languages that in India they speak, one particular language is Marathi, which is spoken primarily in the state of Maharashtra. They just had a premiere of a very interesting movie, and that is called Pepsi. And it's kind of a little take, a satirical take on Pepsi. And the movie is made in such a way that these 2 kids are going out, and the whole theme is revolving around now the river is dry, where will I get my fish? And the conversation and discussion about environment and the whole thing is done very nicely about the whole thing. So education is the best way to avert human-made disasters and to have proper responses to those in need. People formed with a values-based education that considered the humanitarian environmental nexus approach is the most urgent thing that is needed. It is proved practice which addresses the root of issues, people's behavior. Ultimately, the humanitarian and also environmental crisis is a behavioral problem. And if people do not change the behavior, we may do all kinds of song and dance. We'll be singing and dancing, that's it. So people have to change the behavior. So concerted and systematic education of the younger generation is the best investment and most promising effort we can see in many parts of the world, including emerging countries. The disruptors of economy and of business models and those engaging in disruptive entrepreneurship, impact investment, impact financing, social corporate responsibility are thankfully on the rise. Innovative environment-friendly business models are populating business schools curriculum. I see this in my own university, at St. John's University Business School. Professors are very involved in the management school to start thinking how the curriculum will be changed to begin to address, to not just make a business just to make profit, but also business to do good. So that kind of thinking is catching up. So increased mobilization of civil society and inclusive partnerships when dealing with humanitarian crisis can yield positive outcomes via sustainable humanitarian interventions. This gradual but steady movement can contribute to integrate the environment into humanitarian action. And the third question that we tried to address was, what can and should we do now to address the challenges building on what we know? As one of the participants, a number of participants in the discussion there, from Turkey to Trinidad to Switzerland and various other countries, can be summed up in saying we need the participation of the local people when addressing this particular nexus. The participation of local people would provide an essential component through making the resolutions real and direct those affected. This means inclusive partnerships, as no stakeholder can tackle these challenges alone. And so you can begin to see that we have to start somehow thinking global and local almost at the same time. We must take lead and continue to integrate environmental education towards a more holistic, sustainable development curricula at all levels. Support the agents, actors of popular culture, as I was referring earlier to this movie in Marathi called Tipsy, which is using that kind of means to promote value of caring for people and the environment, help young people to see the link between their actions, quality of the environment, and in turn, quality of their life and that of the others. Of course, we have to continue to promote alternative business models by supporting young innovators and entrepreneurs engaged in businesses focused on solving humanitarian crisis. Thankfully, there are a number of students in business schools who are thinking in these terms. Promote new models of environmentally friendly rebuilding in areas destroyed by the storms, earthquakes, and fires. Disseminate environmental humanitarian nexus science to the general public in a language accessible to them. So these are kind of few highlights, but I think I would encourage you to go on this dialogue, and you'll find some interesting conversations taking place there. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you, Professor. We're finishing right on time, as befits a dialogue taking place in Switzerland. So let's, coffee is outside on the left, and please have a good, strong coffee. Come back in 15 minutes at 11:15, and we'll really start opening up for general discussion and getting all of your thoughts about where we can go next. Thank you very much.